Weakness is not something that lives in your muscles. It's not even something that exists in your physical being the way most people think it does. Weakness is a pattern of thought. It is a seed that has been planted in the mind, nurtured by repetition and belief until it begins to show up in your actions, in your confidence, in the way you respond to life. People often confuse weakness with lack of physical power or resources, but in truth, weakness is a mental construct. If you think you're weak, you will feel weak, and eventually you will behave in ways that align with that belief. It's not the body that betrays you. It's the mind that has been trained to accept defeat, trained to surrender before the fight has even begun. When you wake up in the morning and immediately say to yourself, I can't do this, you've already handed the victory over to weakness. The body could have been perfectly capable, the circumstances could have been manageable, but because the mind bowed down, weakness won the battle before you even took a single step. The beautiful thing about this truth is that if weakness begins in the mind, then strength also begins in the mind. It means you are not bound to the weakness you've been carrying. It means you are not locked in the prison of your past conditioning. If you can recognize that weakness is nothing but a thought pattern that you've rehearsed over and over again, then you also have the power to interrupt it, replace it, and destroy it by creating a new thought pattern. Every weakness that you feel is simply a story you've told yourself for so long that it feels real. But stories can be rewritten and beliefs can be reshaped. The problem is most people never stop to examine the narrative they're living by. They accept the idea that because they fail once, they are destined to always fail. They accept the lie that because they don't have the same advantages as someone else, they are somehow less capable. Weakness thrives in unexamined thoughts, in unquestioned belief, in the corners of your mind where you don't shine the light of awareness. Think about the times you've said, I'm not good at this, or I'm not strong enough to handle that. Were those absolute truths? Or were they interpretations based on fear, past experiences, or comparisons to others? Most of the time, those statements aren't reality. They are reflections of a mental lens that is clouded by doubt and insecurity. When you shift the lens, the picture changes. A mountain that once looked impossible suddenly looks like a challenge you can climb step by step. A setback that once made you feel like quitting becomes a lesson that strengthens you for the next round. Weakness isn't real in the way you think. It's a perception. And because it's a perception, you can kill it by changing how you choose to see yourself and the situations around you. But here's the catch. The mind doesn't shift on its own. You can't simply wish weakness away. It's been built up over years of repeated thinking, so you must be intentional about creating new mental patterns. You must begin by catching yourself in the act. The next time you think, I can't handle this, stop and ask, is that really true? Or is that just weakness talking? This one question can be the start of a revolution in your thinking. Because when you challenge weakness, you strip it of its power. When you call it out, it can no longer hide in the shadows of your mind. The moment you shine light on it, you start to see how flimsy it really is, how it was never as solid as it pretended to be. Weakness wants you to believe that it is part of who you are. But it's not your identity, it's just a mental habit. And like any habit, it can be broken. The more you practice new thoughts of strength, of possibility, of resilience, the weaker those old patterns become. Over time, the mental muscles of strength grow, and the voice of weakness grows quieter. You start to notice that things which once intimidated you no longer shake you the same way. You find yourself stepping into situations with more confidence because your mind is no longer wired for defeat, but wired for strength. That's why you'll see two people face the same problem, and one will crumble while the other will rise. The difference isn't their body. It isn't even the external challenge. It's their mind. One has rehearsed weakness. The other has rehearsed strength. If weakness lives in the mind, then the battlefield is within. The greatest victory you will ever win is not over other people, not over circumstances, but over the thoughts that try to convince you that you are not enough. Once you conquer that battle, no external force can truly defeat you. You may face obstacles, yes. You may face setbacks, yes. But you won't see them as proof of weakness. You'll see them as opportunities to exercise strength. And every time you choose strength over weakness, you are rewiring your brain. You are programming yourself to rise higher. And you are proving to yourself that weakness has no home in your mind anymore. The way you see yourself will always determine how far you go. Because every action you take flows directly from your self-image. If a person believes deep down that they are weak, limited, or unworthy, they will unconsciously sabotage themselves at every turn. They won't step into opportunities. They won't speak up. They won't push beyond the line of comfort because the mind has already drawn a boundary around them. That boundary is not real. It's not something life put there. It's something their self-image created. You can have all the talent in the world, all the resources at your fingertips, but if you carry a weak self-image, you will never fully use what you've been given. Your self-image is the thermostat of your life. It sets the level at which you operate. You may dream of greater things, you may desire success, but unless your self-image rises to match that desire, you will always find a way to pull yourself back down. This is why so many people repeat the same cycle. They make progress for a while, they push toward a goal, but then suddenly they find themselves slipping back into old patterns as if something invisible is holding them there. That invisible force is their self-image. It doesn't matter how much they consciously want success. If they see themselves as unworthy or incapable, their subconscious will pull them back to where it believes they belong. That's why transformation has to start with the inner picture. If you want to kill weakness, you must change the way you see yourself. You must form a self-image that reflects strength, resilience, and worthiness. Because the mind doesn't act on what you want. It acts on what you are convinced you are. And when you become convinced that you are strong, your actions will naturally align with strength. Think of someone who carries themselves with confidence. They may not be the tallest in the room. They may not have the most impressive background, but their presence is undeniable. Why? Because their self-image radiates strength. They believe they belong. They believe they are capable. And that belief leaks out into everything they do, the way they speak, the way they walk, the way they handle challenges. On the other hand, someone with a weak self-image can be overflowing with potential, yet you'll see them shrink back, hesitate, second-guess themselves. Their weakness isn't a lack of talent. It's a lack of alignment between their ability and the picture they hold of themselves. And until that picture changes, their life won't change. The self-image is powerful because it doesn't just influence how you see yourself. It shapes how the world sees you. People respond to the energy you carry. If you see yourself as weak, others will pick up on it. If you see yourself as strong, people will begin to treat you with the respect and recognition that matches its strength. The outer world is a mirror reflecting the inner world, and the inner world is your self-image. That's why when you elevate your self-image, everything around you starts to shift. Opportunities that seemed out of reach suddenly appear. Relationships take on a new depth. Work becomes more rewarding. Nothing outside changed first. It all began with you deciding to no longer see yourself as weak. But how does one actually change the self-image? It begins with awareness. You must notice the way you talk about yourself. The labels you've accepted, the limitations you've allowed to define you. Every time you say, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, or that's just who I am, you are reinforcing a weak self-image. And that self-image keeps you trapped. The key is to interrupt those patterns and replace them with images of strength. Visualize yourself as the person you want to become. Speak words that affirm your capability. Surround yourself with environments that reinforce growth, not weakness. Over time, the mind accepts a new picture as truth. And once that happens, weakness begins to dissolve because the foundation it rested on, your old self-image, no longer exists. Discipline plays a role here too, because repetition is what carves belief into the subconscious. You can't tell yourself once that you are strong and expect your self-image to transform. You must feed the mind every day with thoughts, words, and actions that support the picture of strength. Just like the body responds to consistent training, the mind responds to consistent mental conditioning. And as you strengthen that inner picture, your outer life begins to mirror it back. Where you once hesitated, you now step forward. Where you once doubted, you now trust. Where you once gave into weakness, you now naturally express strength because your self-image no longer allows you to operate any other way. The truth is, weakness cannot survive in the mind of someone who knows who they are. It cannot thrive in the heart of someone whose self-image is rooted in power, clarity, and worthiness. Once you raise your self-image, you raise the standard of your entire life, and weakness loses its grip because it has no place in the identity you have chosen for yourself. Fear wears the mask of protection, but in reality, it is weakness in disguise. Fear whispers in your ear, telling you to stay where you are, to avoid risk, to play small, to not try because you might fail. It dresses itself up as caution, as logic, even as wisdom. But underneath it is the same old weakness, the same old voice designed to keep you from growing into your full potential. The truth is, every time you allow fear to dictate your choices, you are feeding weakness. You are handing it power over your life. Weakness doesn't often show up by calling itself weakness. It shows up as hesitation, as doubt, as irrational explanations for why you shouldn't take a step forward. But if you peel back the layers, you'll see it for what it really is, fear running the show. And fear, left unchecked, will build walls around your future. It will lock you to routines, into safe zones, into lives that look secure on the surface but are empty of growth and expansion. Think about all the moments you felt fear trying to hold you back. It wasn't the physical obstacle that scared you. It was the picture your mind painted of what could go wrong. Fear is always about imagination. It takes what hasn't happened yet and convinces you that disaster is certain. But notice something powerful. The fear lies only in the mind, not in reality. You feared speaking up because you imagined rejection. You feared starting the business because you imagined failure. You feared walking away from comfort because you imagined loss. In every case, weakness slipped in through the door of fear and kept you still. But if fear exists only in the mind, then weakness also exists only in the mind, which means the power to overcome it is already inside you. When you choose to act in spite of fear, weakness loses its disguise. The moment you face what you thought would destroy you, you realize it was never as big as it seemed. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward even while fear is screaming at you. Weakness says, stop, stay safe, don't risk it. Strength says, feel the fear and do it anyway. That moment of choice defines the direction of your life. Those who surrender to fear live a life half lived, where weakness grows stronger with every missed opportunity. Those who push through fear discover that on the other side lies growth, freedom, and strength. Every time you confront fear, you weaken the hold of weakness. Every time you avoid fear, you strengthen the chains that keep you trapped. The decision is always yours. It doesn't matter if the fear is about starting something new, ending something that no longer serves you, or stepping into a bigger version of yourself. The principle is the same. The moment you take action, weakness has no more power because it only thrives on hesitation. Think about children learning to walk. They fall again and again, but they don't let the fear of falling stop them from trying. They don't interpret failure as proof of weakness. They simply get up and keep moving. As adults, though, we begin to assign meaning to fear. We take one failure and turn it into a belief. I'm not good enough. I'm not capable. I'll never succeed. That is weakness putting on the clothes of fear and living rent free in your mind. To kill weakness, you must stop giving fear that kind of meaning. A failure isn't proof of your limitation. It's feedback. A rejection isn't evidence of your unworthiness. It's redirection. When you adopt that perspective, fear begins to lose its disguise. And weakness no longer has a home to hide in. What once looked like a giant wall in front of you becomes a door that you can walk through with courage. The more you face fear head on, the more you begin to trust yourself. And that trust is where strength is born. Weakness cannot survive in the presence of self-trust because when you know you can handle whatever comes, fear loses its power. Instead of asking, what if I fail? You start asking, what if I grow? Instead of asking, what if it doesn't work out? You start asking, what if it does? That simple shift in perspective begins to erode the foundation of weakness. Fear no longer paralyzes you, it motivates you. You start to see it as a signal you are stepping outside of comfort and into expansion. And once you understand that, you realize fear is never the enemy. It was simply a disguise that weakness used to keep you from stepping into your strength. Weakness thrives when you believe fear's lies. It dies when you expose those lies with action. The people who accomplish extraordinary things are not fearless. They are simply unwilling to let fear masquerading as weakness control them. They move forward anyway. They take the risk anyway. They speak their truth anyway. And in doing so, they reveal that weakness is nothing more than an illusion that collapses the moment you confront it. Fear may always whisper, but its disguise loses its power when you recognize it for what it is and choose strength over hesitation. Weakness is not some external force holding you down. It is built from the limiting beliefs you've accepted as truth. Every time you say, I can't, every time you convince yourself that something's impossible, every time you compare yourself to someone else and conclude that you are less, you are feeding weakness. Those beliefs settle into your subconscious, and from there they dictate how you think, how you act, and ultimately what you achieve. The mind is incredibly powerful, but it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't separate truth from lies. It accepts whatever you repeat with conviction. So when you keep telling yourself that you're not smart enough, not strong enough, not disciplined enough, the mind builds an identity around that story. That identity is weakness, and it will continue to control your actions until you make the decision to reprogram it. The danger of limiting beliefs is that they often feel normal. They don't come in screaming that they're here to sabotage you. They slip in quietly, shaped by your upbringing, your environment, your failures, and even the words of people you trusted. Maybe a teacher once told you that you weren't good at something, and you accepted it as truth. Maybe you grew up hearing your family say, people like us don't succeed, and you never questioned it. Over time, those beliefs hardened into walls in your mind. Walls that block your growth, walls that convince you to stay small. Weakness thrives inside those walls. But here's the truth, those walls are illusions. They look solid, but the moment you decide to push against them, you'll realize they were only built out of thoughts, not facts. Replacing those limiting beliefs is not about wishful thinking. It's about intentional reprogramming. You cannot kill weakness by focusing on it. You must replace it with strength. If the belief is, I can't, the replacement must be, I can and I will. If the belief is, I'm not enough, the replacement must be, I am more than capable. Every time the old thought tries to rise up, you answer with the new belief. At first, it feels unnatural, even false, because you've been practicing weakness for so long. But just like any habit, repetition creates truth in the subconscious. The same way you once convinced yourself of limitation, you can now convince yourself of possibility. And as the subconscious begins to accept these empowering beliefs, your actions will naturally shift. You'll find yourself stepping into challenges you once avoided. You'll notice a quiet confidence growing where fear used to dominate. That is the process of weakness dying and strength taking its place. Look closely at the most successful, resilient people, and you'll notice something. They refuse to accept limiting beliefs. Where others say, that's impossible, they say, there's a way. Where others see barriers, they see stepping stones. It's not that they don't experience doubt. It's that they choose not to give it authority. They choose to feed the belief in possibility. And that choice makes all the difference, because the mind can only operate on the instructions you give it. If you give it weakness, it produces weak results. If you give it strength, it produces strong results. It's a simple principle, but one most people overlook because they've become so accustomed to listening to their doubts. Every limitation you've accepted can be traced back to a belief. If you believe money is hard to earn, your actions will reflect scarcity. If you believe relationships always fail, you will unconsciously sabotage them. If you believe you don't have the discipline to achieve your goals, you won't even try. Weakness grows in those beliefs, feeding off your agreement with them. But the moment you break that agreement, the moment you say, this belief no longer defines me, you take back the power. Replacing it with a new, empowering belief is like planting a new seed. With consistent nourishment, through affirmations, visualization, action, that seed grows into strength. It's important to realize that this process isn't just about positive thinking. It's about aligning your thoughts with the life you want to live. Weakness tells you that you are stuck, that the past defines the future, that circumstances control you. Strength tells you that you are free to choose a new thought, a new action, a new reality. And when you consistently choose empowering beliefs, your environment begins to shift. Opportunities that once seemed invisible appear because your mind is now looking for them. People who resonate with your new energy are drawn to you. Circumstances bend in your favor, not because the world suddenly changed, but because you changed the filter through which you see it. Weakness is nothing more than the accumulation of old, limiting beliefs. Strength is the deliberate practice of installing new ones. Every time you replace a limiting belief with an empowering one, you are tearing down weakness at its root. It doesn't matter how long you've carried those beliefs. It doesn't matter how deeply they've been etched into your subconscious. The moment you decide to rewrite them, the process of transformation begins. And as that process continues, you will notice that weakness has no choice but to fade away because it cannot survive in the presence of beliefs that affirm your power, your worth, and your unlimited potential. Weakness does not survive when discipline becomes your standard because discipline is the daily act of choosing strength even when it doesn't feel convenient. Most people assume weakness is destroyed in big moments, when you finally conquer a fear, when you finally break through an obstacle, when you finally win the fight. But weakness doesn't usually die in one dramatic moment. It dies slowly, quietly, through consistent choices made day after day. Every time you decide to follow through on what you said you would do, you chip away at weakness. Every time you wake up and keep a promise to yourself, you weaken the grip of laziness, of excuses, of hesitation. Discipline is the hammer that breaks the chains of weakness. And without it, no amount of motivation or inspiration will last. Motivation gets you started, but discipline keeps you moving when the feelings wear off. Weakness thrives on waiting for the right move, the perfect time in the burst of energy. It says, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll start when I feel ready. I'll get serious when conditions are right. But strength says, I do it because I said I would, regardless of how I feel. That's the difference between people who rise and people who stay stuck. Weakness is a slave to feelings. Discipline is a servant of commitment. When you let feelings dictate your actions, weakness grows. When you let commitment dictate your actions, discipline grows and weakness starves. Think about the people you admire who achieve extraordinary things. It's not that they never feel tired, never feel doubt, never feel like quitting. It's that they don't allow those feelings to control their decisions. They understand that discipline is stronger than emotion. A disciplined mind can push the body farther than the body thinks it can go. A disciplined spirit can carry you when everything in you screams to stop. And every time you practice that discipline, you are killing weakness a little more. Training yourself to rise above comfort and live according to purpose. Discipline doesn't have to be grand. It's built in the small, consistent actions. It's in choosing to focus instead of scroll, to practice instead of procrastinate, to take the stairs instead of the shortcut, to speak truth instead of staying silent. These small acts compound over time, reshaping who you are. Weakness cannot withstand that kind of consistency because discipline builds momentum. At first, it feels like a battle. You fight with yourself to get up early, to stay focused, to resist old habits. But once discipline takes root, the fight changes. It becomes less about willpower and more about identity. You no longer force yourself to act strong. You simply are strong because discipline has rewired your self-image. Every person has moments where they fall short, but the disciplined person refuses to stay there. Weakness whispers, see, you failed again. This is who you are. Discipline answers, no, this is just a stumble, and I will rise again. That is why discipline is not about perfection, it's about persistence. Weakness wants you to believe one failure erases all progress, but discipline knows that one failure is nothing compared to a lifetime of consistency. When you keep moving forward despite setbacks, weakness has no foothold because its greatest weapon is convincing you to quit. Discipline takes that weapon away by teaching you to stand up every time you fall. The beautiful part is that discipline compounds just like weakness does. One weak choice makes the next one easier, and soon weakness becomes a habit. But one disciplined choice makes the next one easier, and soon strength becomes a habit. At first, you are forcing yourself to keep going, but eventually it becomes automatic. Your mind no longer negotiates with weakness. It simply defaults to strength. That is why discipline is freedom. People think discipline is restrictive, but in reality, it is what frees you from the prison of weakness. Without it, you are at the mercy of mood, circumstances, and distractions. With it, you are free to live with power, clarity, and control. Discipline also builds trust in yourself. When you consistently do what you said you would do, you begin to believe in your own word. That belief grows into confidence, and confidence is strength. Weakness dies when you can look in the mirror and know that you can count on yourself. Many people struggle not because they lack ability, but because they don't trust themselves to follow through. They break promises to themselves so often that their subconscious no longer believes them. Discipline repairs that trust. It says, when I decide, I follow through. My word matters. And when your word matters to yourself, it begins to matter to others. People respect discipline because it reflects strength of character. Discipline is not glamorous. It doesn't always feel good in the moment. It often looks like quiet repetition, like doing the work when no one is watching, like resisting the easy path. But it is in those hidden moments that weakness is truly destroyed. The person who shows up every day, who builds brick by brick, who stays faithful to the process, that is the person who eventually stands tall, unshaken, because weakness no longer has a place in their life. Every single day you are faced with a choice to lean into weakness or to lean into strength. Weakness is not something forced upon you by fate. It is not something written into your DNA. It is a decision that gets repeated until it becomes a pattern. And the same is true for strength. Strength is not something a chosen few are born with. It is the outcome of choosing to rise when you could stay down, choosing to persist when you could quit, choosing to believe in possibility when doubt feels easier. When you strip it all down, life comes to these small decisions stacked on top of each other, and the sum of those decisions determines whether you live from weakness or life from strength. The mind will always present both options. One voice will say, it's too hard, you're not ready, you're not good enough. Another voice will say, push forward, you can grow through this, you have what it takes. The choice is yours every time. Weakness wants you to believe it's your natural state. That is who you are. It wants you to think you're powerless to change. But weakness is never permanent. It's only sustained through repeated choices. You can starve it the moment you stop feeding it. And how do you starve it? By choosing strength, even the smallest ways, especially when it feels uncomfortable. Strength is built not in grand gestures, but in daily alignment. When you choose to keep a promise to yourself, that's strength. When you choose to rise early instead of sleeping in because comfort called, that's strength. When you choose to step into an opportunity even while fear trembles inside you, that's strength. Every choice becomes a vote for who you are becoming. Weakness says, stay safe, don't risk, don't change. Strength says, grow, expand, step forward. And each time you cast your vote for strength, you rewrite your identity. Over time, it stops being about a single decision and becomes who you are. You no longer just choose strength, you embody it. The powerful truth is that weakness and strength cannot coexist in the same space. When you continually choose strength, weakness has nowhere to live. Its voice grows quieter, its grip grows weaker. You may still hear it whispering, but it no longer controls your actions. And that is the moment you realize weakness was never a destiny, only a default. It only lived as long as you allowed it. And once you stop allowing it, once you stop entertaining its lies, it loses its place in your life. Look back at times when you thought you couldn't go on but chose to anyway. At the moment, it may have felt like the smallest step, but afterward you saw that it changed everything. That's the power of choosing strength. It multiplies. One choice to move forward opens doors to more strength, just like one choice to give into weakness creates more weakness. It's a cycle, and you get to decide which cycle you participate in. When you continuously choose weakness, life shrinks, opportunities fade, relationships suffer, self-belief crumbles. But when you continuously choose strength, life expands. You see possibilities where others see problems. You rise where others fall. You keep moving where others stay stuck. The truth that many overlook is that every excuse, every delay, every hesitation is just a choice for weakness disguised. People tell themselves stories to justify it. I don't have time. I'll start tomorrow. It's not the right season. But when you peel it back, it's a decision to side with weakness. And just the same, every time you say, I will do this now. I will face this challenge. I will honor my word. You are choosing strength. And the more you choose strength, the easier it becomes, because you are rewiring your mind and spirit to default to that choice. This is why strength is never about talent, background, or luck. It's about decision. People rise not because they were handed strength, because they chose it when weakness was knocking. They chose it when fear was loud. They chose it when everything in them wanted to quit. And every time they chose it, weakness shrank until it no longer had power. That same power lies within you. No one can take the choice from you. Circumstances cannot strip it. People cannot deny it. Every morning you wake up with the ability to say yes to strength or yes to weakness. That decision is yours. And it is in that decision where your future is created. Strength doesn't need to wait for the perfect moment. It doesn't need everything aligned. It shows up the moment you decide. Weakness fades the moment you stop giving it permission. Your life becomes the reflection of the choices you repeat. And when you repeat the choice for strength, weakness no longer survives. Every choice you make builds momentum, shaping your habits, shaping your identity, shaping your destiny. Weakness is not inevitable. Strength is not unreachable. They are both options, both available. And the outcome of your life is simply determined by which one you choose more often.